So when I was asked to talk, give a JDOV talk, I thought, well, since my name is Dov, I had to say yes to it. I'm not quite sure now whether I wish I'd been called a different name, but in any case, I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the new Jewish question. Before I do so, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and what I do. Well, I basically spend most of my days thinking, talking, and writing about Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I must be crazy. I'm often asked, and I often ask myself, why I do this. Why do I spend so much time thinking and agonizing over this, let's face it, depressing topic? So I want to begin by telling you a bit about how I've come to this point, the stages, if you like, of my personal relationship with Israel. And I'm going to do so because I think it speaks to a wider issue about all of our relationships with Israel and how this is what I call the new Jewish question. Basically, there have been like 4 stages in my relationship with Israel. The first stage, my teens, was when I was at school. And I clearly remember during this period of time discussing with my friends, in the event of a war between Israel and Britain, hard as it would be to imagine, in the event of such a war, which side would we fight for? Some of my friends automatically said, well, of course, Israel. Others said, obviously, the United Kingdom. I was torn. I was, after all, British. I was born and raised in London. I'd spent all my life in England. But at the same time, I went to a Jewish school. I was a member of a Zionist youth movement. I would spend Pesach every year in Israel with my family. I had Israeli friends. Surely I couldn't fight against them. And after all, wasn't Israel always in the right? That was the first stage, a stage of conflict, of trying to figure out where my loyalties, where my identity lay. The second stage was when I was at university. After spending part of my gap year in Israel, by the time I went to university, I was a staunch Zionist. On day 1 I arrived, I put a huge Israeli flag in my dorm room on the wall, making a clear statement of loyalty and of identity. And whenever the subject of Israel came up in discussions with my university friends, I automatically, instinctively became Israel's spokesman. I would explain Israel's actions, justify it, defend it. I remember one such discussion with a group of my friends, and they were criticizing something about what Israel did, and I would point out what about what Britain was doing in Northern Ireland? Immediately, in other words, I had taken a side, and that side was clear. I was seriously considering, at that point, moving to Israel after I graduated, making Aliyah. Stage 3, I didn't make Aliyah. Instead, I moved to the United States. I went to graduate school in the United States, and I ended up studying Middle East politics. I continued, and I ended up doing my PhD on Israel, and particularly on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And the more I learned about Israel, the more disillusioned with it I became. The more I began to realize that much of what I had been told growing up about Israel wasn't true, or at least wasn't the whole truth. The more I learned, the more disillusioned I became, and I became more critical, not just of Israel, but even of Zionism itself. By the time I went to Israel to spend a year doing research for my doctoral dissertation, I felt so alienated from the country, from Israel, that I even refused to speak Hebrew. I didn't want to associate myself in any way with Israel or with its people. That was in my 20s. Stage 4, which I would say is my current stage. Since then, I've been to Israel many more times and spent 2 more years living there. I travel to Israel frequently. I read about it incessantly. I watch Israeli movies whenever they come out. Occasionally, I listen even to Israeli music, although I'm no big fan. Israel is a huge part of my life, but I'm still very critical of Israeli government policies and actions. However, I still now make the distinction between Israel, the country that I love, the country that I feel deeply attached to, and the policies of its government. I love Israel, and it's a big part of my life, but I don't see it through the rose-tinted lenses that I used to see it in the past. I know it has some major problems and challenges, like any country, and it probably always will. I'm not going to turn away from Israel, but I'm also not going to uncritically embrace it. So my relationship with Israel, then, has changed in many ways over the years, and it continues to change, and I'm sure it will continue to evolve. There have been times when I've wanted to just walk away, to disassociate myself altogether from the place. And there have been other times when I've wished I could be there. I don't think this brief story of my relationship with Israel, difficult, uneasy, certainly challenging, is unique. In fact, I think it speaks to an issue that many of us, many Jews living outside of Israel, face when it comes to deciding and defining our relationship with Israel. And I believe the question of how Jews outside Israel should relate to it is what I call the new Jewish question. Let me explain why. First of all, what was the old Jewish question? The old Jewish question was a question that dominated Jewish life and politics for about 200 years, from the beginning of emancipation of Jews at the end of the 18th century till roughly World War II. And it was the question of whether Jews could integrate as full and equal citizens in the European societies in which they lived. This was the animating issue in Jewish politics, and in response to it, a whole host of ideologies emerged. One such ideology, of course, was Zionism, which said, in effect, that Jews couldn't and shouldn't try to integrate into European societies, but rather had to establish their own state. Now, of course, we know that Zionism ultimately won that competition between Jewish ideologies. And as a result of Israel's establishment, and particularly the Holocaust, that old Jewish question was settled once and for all. But a new Jewish question has emerged, because the existence of a Jewish state for the first time in 2,000 years poses unprecedented issues for Jews, for the Jewish people. It is almost impossible for Jews to ignore Israel, even if they wanted to. Very few diaspora Jews can remain apathetic about what is happening there. They're almost obligated to have an opinion about Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, especially now that the issue has become almost an obsessive issue in Western public opinion. For better or for worse, many diaspora Jews often feel somehow implicated in what Israel does. As a self-declared Jewish state, Israel claims to act not only on behalf of its own citizens, but also on behalf of Jews worldwide. What Israel does, what happens to Israel, and what happens in Israel, therefore, affects Jews all over the world. And that's why the subject of Israel dominates Jewish politics to this day, since 1948. Since diaspora Jews cannot escape the impact of Israel, they must confront the question of what Israel means to them. So that's what I mean by the fundamental question of Jewish politics today. The new Jewish question is, what is our relationship to Israel? What should that relationship be? To put it another way, the old Jewish question was about the politics of Jewish statelessness. The new Jewish question is about the politics of Jewish statehood. How should Jews living outside Israel relate to it? How important should Israel be to them? What obligations, if any, do Jews have to Israel? Must they support the Jewish state? And if so, how? Must they always support Israel, regardless of what it does, even when Israeli governments act in ways that they believe are short-sighted, self-defeating, or morally problematic? If the Jewish state acts in ways that contradict Jewish ethics, should Jews be loyal to Jewish ethics or to the Jewish state? Can diaspora Jews publicly criticize Israel? Should they? In short, what kind of loyalty do we owe Israel? It's ironic that the issue of loyalty that has bedeviled diaspora Jews for so long, the question of whether Jews had to be loyal or could be loyal to the states in which they lived, has now returned with an ironic twist. Now the loyalty question concerns what should be our loyalty to the Jewish state. Some people believe that Jews should be absolutely and uncritically loyal to Israel. Others believe that, in fact, criticism is a form of loyalty to Israel. On this subject, there's a wide range of Jewish answers. Now, the debate in the Jewish world is about this Jewish question. How should we express ourselves with regards to Israel? Personally, I don't think there is one right answer to the Jewish question. For some, it might be moving to Israel. For others, it might be supporting Israel, whatever it does. For others, it might be protesting against Israel's policies. There are a range of different answers. I think we need to accept this basic fact and not try to impose one answer on other Jews, to expect that there is one kind of acceptable relationship with Israel, one way of engaging with Israel. Unfortunately, in much of the Jewish world today, that's not the case. Rather, we seem to be arguing incessantly and increasingly bitterly over what kind of relationship we should have with Israel. Whether you can be a good Jew and still disagree with Israeli policies. Whether you can be a good Jew and not live in Israel. This seems to be, to me, the issue that is now the most divisive, most controversial, and most problematic issue in Jewish life today. I'm here to talk about that and to be open about the difficulty, the dilemma that we all face in trying to figure out what our relationship is with Israel. I've been making an observation, but I'm going to end with a dream. My dream is that we can accept a plurality of stances and attitudes with regards to Israel. That we can accept that the question of our relationship with Israel is an evolving one, is an uneasy one, and is a deeply challenging one. And we can accept that instead of trying to impose one model upon others, we can accept that there is a diversity of responses. And in doing so, we can allow the Jews to hopefully settle the new Jewish question. Thank you very much.